2 preseason games, 2 embarrassing losses on the glass, and the exact same problem showing up every single time like clockwork. The Indiana Fever aren't just losing rebounding battles, they're handing opponents a step-by-step manual for shutting down the most exciting backcourt in the WNBA. Caitlyn Clark and Kelsey Mitchell can't create when defenders are already planted exactly where they need space. Aaliyah Boston can't operate when help defense collapses before she even catches the ball. And the forwards supposed to fix all of that either can't shoot from the outside, are sitting on the most fragile roster contract available, or are now injured and going public with strong hints that the story being told about her situation isn't quite right. The front office had answers and somehow made every one of them messier. This isn't about 2 bad preseason nights. This is about a roster built in a way that works against its own best players, and a front office that might be running out of time to fix it before the games actually count. Everything is about to get laid out. All of it. Dallas out-rebounded Indiana 45-26. That's not a stat you glance at and move on from. A 1-9 rebound gap is the kind of number that tells you everything about how 2 rosters are constructed and which one is built for the way basketball actually gets played right now. This wasn't a close game that got away late. This was a physical, sustained, completely one-sided battle on the glass that Indiana had no real answer for from the opening tip to the final buzzer. And what makes it genuinely damaging isn't just the margin. It's that this was the second time it happened. The New York Liberty came into the first preseason game and did the exact same thing before Dallas even had a chance to try. 2 different teams. 2 completely different rosters and systems and styles. Both of them walked into Indiana's paint and owned it like they'd been doing it all season. When one team beats you on the boards, you can point to a bad matchup or an off night. When 2 teams beat you the same exact way in back-to-back games, your roster is the one doing the talking. Aaliyah Boston wasn't in the lineup against Dallas, and her absence made the short-term picture uglier than it needed to be. Add in her career average of 8 rebounds per game, and the final number shifts from 45-26 to something closer to 45-34. Still a blowout on the glass. Still a gap that doesn't close by effort alone. Boston being out hurt. But the uncomfortable truth is that even with her healthy, the structural problem doesn't disappear. It just gets slightly less obvious. Steph White didn't try to spin it after the game. She pointed straight at defensive rebounding and transition defense as the areas that burned her team, and the frustration in how she talked about it wasn't the kind coaches use when they think execution is the issue. It wasn't, "We'll clean it up in practice." It was the kind of frustration that comes from seeing something built into the roster itself, something that film sessions and extra conditioning don't. Reach. She said her team got out-toughed, that their urgency wasn't where it needed to be, that they were standing and watching instead of moving. All of that is true, but underneath all of it is a construction problem that urgency alone won't solve. And what that problem actually looks like is about to become very clear. Indiana's current frontcourt rotation without Boston is Monique Billings, Maisha Hines-Allen, Michaela Timpson, and Dearest Dantas. 4 players. And not one of them is a perimeter threat that forces a defender to leave the basket and chase them to the 3-point line. Not one. Which means every time a shot goes up, the opposing team's bigs are already stationed near the rim, already in rebounding position, already exactly where they need to be, while Indiana's forwards are still trying to locate their spots. That's not a rotations issue or a communication breakdown. That's what happens when your entire front court belongs near the basket and nobody on it pulls defenders away from it. The opposing big assigned to guard an Indiana forward doesn't have to think about the perimeter. He can park himself inside, contest everything near the rim, and be in perfect rebounding position before the ball even leaves the shooter's hands. It's almost effortless defense, and Indiana is handing it to them. The projected 1-2 person roster also carries 7 guards, most of them under 6 feet tall. So when Indiana sends a forward to the glass, there isn't enough size or length in the rotation to win those battles against teams that actually deploy bigs who can rebound. The Liberty used their length at the forward spots to physically move Indiana's rotation around. Then, Dallas came in and did it differently, using speed and relentless activity to generate offensive rebounds and turn them into second-chance points that kept Indiana from ever building any momentum. Hines Allen is strong and physical, and brings toughness. But toughness without length against WNBA caliber bigs who know how to use their bodies is a losing proposition on the glass. She's not a floor stretcher. Her defender doesn't have to go anywhere when she's on the floor. And that pattern repeats itself all the way through the rotation. Indiana doesn't just have a rebounding problem. It has a spacing problem disguised as a rebounding problem. And until someone addresses what's actually causing it, the box scores are going to keep looking the same way they did in both preseason games. To really understand why this matters so much and why 2 preseason games exposed it so completely, you need to understand what a stretch 4 actually does, because Indiana's front court is essentially the opposite of one. A stretch 4 is a power forward who can step out to the three-point line and actually make the shot consistently enough that defenders can't afford to ignore them. That's the whole concept. One player standing beyond the arc forces one big defender to leave the basket, and the moment that happens, the paint opens up in ways it simply cannot when every forward on the floor lives inside. For Indiana specifically, this matters more than it would for almost any other team in the league right now because of who their 2 best offensive players are and what they each need to operate at their highest level. Clark is most dangerous when she can get downhill with open space in front of her. When the paint is already packed before she even initiates her drive, she's attacking bodies instead of attacking a lane. The shot still goes up, the foul might get called, but the rhythm is gone and the defense is winning. Boston is most effective when she catches a post entry with one defender on her and room to make her first move. When help defense is already sliding over before she can put the ball on the floor, her options shrink immediately. Both of those things, Clark attacking downhill, Boston working in the post, require a forward on the floor who pulls a big away from the basket. Without one, the defender assigned to Indiana's 4 doesn't have to think. They stay inside. They're already in exactly the spot where Clark wants to attack and where Boston needs room, and Indiana has no answer for it because nobody on the current rotation is making them leave. The WNBA is moving the same direction the NBA went years ago. Too much perimeter talent, too much guard skill, too many playmakers operating in space for teams to afford bigs who can't stretch the floor. Indiana has all that perimeter talent and none of the front court spacing to let it breathe. That's the gap. And the Fever front office actually drafted someone to fill it. Indiana used a second-round pick on a 6'4" shooter out of Vanderbilt named Justine Pat, 7-foot wingspan, a shooting stroke her college coach called the best he'd ever coached, and a skill set that, the moment she stepped onto a WNBA floor in a preseason game against the Liberty, immediately showed exactly why she was drafted. Defenders had to step out and actually guard her beyond the arc. The moment that happened, there was more room near the basket for Clark to attack and more space in the post for Boston to operate. One player, one preseason appearance. The concept proved itself almost immediately. Pat wasn't just a stationary corner shooter at Vanderbilt either. Her length let her guard multiple positions on the defensive end, covering ground that shorter forwards simply can't cover. A 6'4" forward with a 7-foot wingspan contesting shots on one end and hitting threes on the other end is a genuinely difficult matchup for WNBA forwards who aren't used to seeing that combination. You can't put a guard on her because she'll post them up. You can't put a big on her because she'll shoot over them or drive by them. She creates problems in both directions, which is exactly the profile Indiana's front court is missing. Her own words paint a picture of someone who has sacrificed constantly to build this skill set. While others were out, she was in the gym. While peers were taking shortcuts, she was putting up shots and watching film. That kind of dedication doesn't produce a player who panics under pressure. It produces someone who knows exactly what they're capable of. And what she showed against the Liberty in her first WNBA game backed up every bit of that. The trigger on her shot is genuinely fast enough that contests that would affect most shooters barely register for her. She was hitting shots in that Liberty game that most players would have pump-faked or hesitated on. That kind of shooting confidence from a player with her size and wingspan is rare, and Indiana found her in the second round. What they did with her next is where the story gets complicated. After Pat proved her value in her very first WNBA appearance, Indiana put her on a development contract instead of a standard roster deal. That decision came from Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox, the two people running this organization. Not a vague front office call that floats around without accountability. Specific people, specific choice, specific consequences. A development contract comes with a 4-day exclusivity window before other teams can begin pursuing a player. Indiana drafted a forward who directly addresses their biggest roster problem, watched her perform in Game 1, and then placed her in the most fragile roster spot available. And now, Pat is injured. That word injured is doing a lot of work in this situation because Pat herself has been active on social media in a way that strongly suggests the narrative being put out about her doesn't match what she's actually experiencing. She's not being vague. She's telling people directly not to believe everything the media is reporting about her situation. A rookie on a development contract doesn't go public with that kind of energy unless something about how she's being handled feels genuinely wrong. The theory that's been circulating makes an uncomfortable amount of sense. The Fever may be keeping Pat off the floor specifically because they don't want other teams to see more of her and decide she's worth pursuing the moment that exclusivity window closes. After one game, it was already obvious she could play at this level. After 2 or 3 more games, every coaching staff in the league would know her name and her value. Keeping her sidelined for whatever reason protects Indiana's window to figure out what they want to do with her contract situation. But here's the risk that makes this genuinely alarming. If Pat ends up signing a standard contract somewhere else because Indiana moved too slowly or too cautiously, that's not a tough break. That's the Fever front office handing a stretch 4 to a competitor while their own team is getting out-rebounded by 19 and watching Clark drive into packed paint. Some other team's coaching staff is going to unlock exactly what she can do, and Indiana will watch it from the other bench. The trade conversation around Cameron Brink landing in Indiana isn't just fan speculation bouncing around on basketball Twitter. It's a direct and logical response to a roster gap that 2 preseason games put on full display in the most public way possible. Brink is a stretch 4 with real WNBA experience. She rebounds. She defends multiple positions. And she hits threes at a rate that forces opposing bigs to actually follow her out to the perimeter, which is the exact thing Indiana's current frontcourt cannot say about a single player in the rotation. The difference between Brink and the Pat conversation is experience. Pat is a rookie still learning the speed and physicality of the professional game. Brink already knows how WNBA bigs play, already understands what it takes to create space at this level, and can step into a role without the adjustment period a second-round rookie needs. That experience matters enormously when you're trying to fix a structural problem before the regular season starts and the games actually count. For Clark, what Brink changes is straightforward. A forward on the floor who hits threes means her defender has to follow her out. That's one fewer body in the paint when Clark attacks downhill. Drives that currently end with Clark absorbing contact in a crowded lane suddenly have a clear path. Kickouts become available where they didn't exist before. The whole offensive geometry shifts the moment one big has to leave the paint and chase a shooter. For Boston, the impact is even more direct. She catches in the post at her best when there's one defender on her and space to operate. Right now, she's catching with help defense already collapsing because Indiana's other forwards give opposing bigs zero reason to be anywhere else. Brink on the floor forces her defender to follow her, and suddenly the help defender has a choice to make instead of a free ride to Boston's position. The trade cost is real pieces would have to move. Cap space matters, and Indiana would need to give something up. But the alternative is watching this same rebounding gap and spacing problem repeat itself once the standings start counting. If Indiana locks Pat into a standard contract, stays aggressive in pursuing a Brink trade, and gets Boston back healthy, the roster stops looking like a construction problem and starts looking like something genuinely competitive. Clark and Mitchell in the backcourt, running one of the most dangerous pick-and-roll combinations in the league. Boston and Brink up front, giving Indiana size, spacing, rebounding, and post presence all at once. Pat coming off the bench as a floor-stretching forward who can guard bigger wings because of her length and punish any defense that loses track of her on the perimeter. Raven Johnson has been genuinely exciting through the preseason as a defensive disruptor and secondary playmaker. Off the bench, she changes the energy of a possession instantly. Add Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull, two players who bring shooting and toughness on the perimeter, and this rotation suddenly has real depth in a way the Fever haven't had in years. The perimeter shooting is already there. The playmaking is already there. The coaching staff is already running a modern offensive system built for exactly this kind of spacing. The only position where it hasn't come together is the 4, and that one position is where Clark either gets downhill lanes or drives into walls. It's where Boston either operates with room or catches with help already waiting. It's where Indiana either forces opposing bigs to make difficult choices or lets them park themselves comfortably and never move. Everything the Fever want to do on offense flows through whether that forward spot is occupied by someone. Defenders actually have to respect beyond the arc. The 2026 window is real. Clark is on a trajectory that doesn't wait for roster decisions to slowly sort themselves out. The talent around her, Boston, Mitchell, Cunningham, Hull, Johnson, is legitimate enough to compete with the best teams in the league. But 2 preseason games just demonstrated, clearly and without much room for interpretation, that the 4 position is where this offense either opens up completely or stays exactly as stuck as it looked against the Liberty and Dallas. The front office has the information. Now, the question is what they do with it. Here's where everything lands. Clark is already playing like an MVP. Boston is a legitimate force when healthy. Mitchell is one of the most underrated guards in the league. The pieces are real, the coaching staff is capable, and the offensive system is built to compete with anyone. But none of it, not the talent, not the playmaking, not the scheme translates into wins if defenders can plant themselves in the paint and never move because Indiana's forwards don't make them think twice. The 4 position is the entire story right now, and it's unresolved in the most uncomfortable way possible. Pat is either the moment Krauskopf and Cox proved they understood what this roster needed, or she becomes the player another team signs, while Indiana keeps getting out-rebounded by numbers that belong in a blowout. Brink is either the trade that unlocks Clark and Boston fully, or she's the conversation Indiana has while someone else makes the move. The talent is there, the window is open, but the front office is the one holding the key, and right now, it's not clear they know which door to use. Stay locked with my channel. Simply Explained for more WNBA updates.